5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We have liftoff.
And welcome to this live recording of the 200th episode, ladies and gentlemen, of Planet Normal. The Telegraph podcast with Alison Pearson.
Hello.
And me, Liam Halligan. So here we are, co-pilot, our 200th voyage. It's amazing we haven't killed each other. On the rocket of right thinking, the capsule of common sense, our flying refuge of reasoned views. Just think, our first voyage to Planet Normal. Do you remember it? May 2020. Our first Planet Normal guest.
I didn't know what a podcast was.
You didn't?
No.
So I don't know what podcast is. Now I am one.
Now I am one.
Our first Planet Normal guest. Anyone remember? Alan Johnson, the former Labour Home Secretary, Shadow Chancellor, Hull MP.
Great writer.
Author of a brilliant memoir of post-war Britain, his 3-part memoir, of course. Since then, we've had many other fabulous Planet Normal guests from the worlds of politics, policy making, showbiz. But our regular Planet Normal listeners, we've also had some of those. They've written to us at planetnormal@telegraph.co.uk. Their stories have captured our imaginations, and
Absolutely.
in turn, you, our listeners. Since we launched in May 2020, we've been, of course, through lockdown, through UK recession, 3 Tory Prime Ministers, 4 Tory Chancellors, war in Ukraine, serious flare-ups in the Middle East, a UK recession, another UK recession, the worst inflation crisis in 50 years, and the emergence of the worst geopolitical tensions, of course, since the Cold War. And to top it all, since we launched Planet Normal, how has Alison Pearson responded to these seismic global events? By spending the equivalent of the annual basic state pension on bringing a cat. From Turkey to Pearson Towers, the heart of Middle England. Alison, this is a home fixture for us. You're among friends. What made you do it?
You get more mileage out of the Turkish cat than you do out of Mrs. Slocum's pussy. You really do. At least Dee Dee the cat has provided material, comic material. It was an international veterinarian humanitarian intervention, so, you know.
It is great to be here among our beloved Planet Normal listeners, not just you here who've come to London, to Cadogan Hall. Thank you so much for coming, but also to the tens of thousands who will listen to this podcast when we release the recording on Thursday morning. We've got 2 fabulous guests for you. This is a 2-hour Planet Normal special for our 200th episode recording. Plus, we've got an extended audience question and answer session after the interval, you lucky, lucky people. And you can see up there, that's how you can submit questions using Slido. So, Alison, let's talk, as we do at the top of every Planet Normal. July election, campaign chaos, his party blindsided, dozens of Tory MPs standing down, a scramble to find new candidates. What is Rishi Sunak thinking?
You know, I think my favourite word of the week, we often have a word of the week, don't we, is what David Cameron, Lord Cameron now, said when Rishi Sunak broke the news to the cabinet, having seen the king beforehand so no one could derail him, and David Cameron called it bold. Now, I've decided that bold is Etonian for, are you out of your effing mind?
Yeah.
So it was bold. What was he thinking? Well, I think there are a number of theories, and one theory is that there were more letters going into the Graham Brady of the 1922 committee for a vote of no confidence than we are yet aware of. History will tell us, so Sunak wouldn't have wanted that humiliation. And also, I strongly suspect, I think Suella Braverman is somewhere in the audience tonight, and as Suella tried to tell him, and Robert Jenrick, then Immigration Minister, tried to tell him the Rwanda Act was not watertight. So Rishi promised that the first flight to Rwanda would happen in July. So if that date came and went, he would look very weak. So by calling the election for July the 4th, he avoids the embarrassment of that the small boats keep on coming as well. So I think there are multiple things. I just want to say, Liam, that I really feel for all the Tory party workers, members. I was talking to a constituency association chair who said, we haven't got any bloody leaflets. There are basically 10 days to find candidates for 160 seats. There's 160 seats that can't begin leafleting, posters, whatever. And I think it's extremely selfish of Rishi Sunak to choose to go so early. It's given them no time to prepare.
Clearly, a lot of the party in the country was blindsided. A lot of the cabinet was blindsided. I don't know about you, but after that cabinet meeting, my WhatsApp was going ballistic with cabinet ministers. You know, WTF was the polite version of what they're actually... Well, actually, I didn't understand some of the acronyms. I had to ask my kids. It's beyond me. I think there are other reasons too, Alison. I think there's a really nasty... Well, we know there's a report into the Grenfell tragedy, of course, for 2017. It's on Sunak's desk. It makes for really grim reading because it's the final report, the interim report. A couple of years ago, the Tories didn't act on a lot of the recommendations of that.
And this is coming on top of the infected blood.
Which is going to cost lots of money.
The post office is also going to cost lots of money.
That rules out tax cuts in the future. And I also think the final nail in the coffin for the sort of Tories go long, have an election in the autumn strategy, which I've been writing about a lot in my Telegraph column, was that in the end, the Bank of England was completely wrong about everything, and inflation wasn't transitory, and even now inflation is sticky. Inflation in America just went up again, okay? We may not get an interest rate cut before the autumn, that's the reality. Inflation's still above target. It's higher than almost everybody thought it would be. And before, just a few weeks ago, the Tories were hoping for 3 interest rate cuts before an October or a November election.
Yeah.
Now there may be none. And so their whole let's wait for things to get better strategy, well, the wheels kind of fell off. But I think pretty unprecedented for a Prime Minister to make such a big decision like that. And unless our political sources are wrong, the only person who knew he was going to do it was the Deputy Prime Minister.
And the King.
Mm-hmm. Unbelievable, really. And as you say, party workers in the country have been completely stymied by this. So what do you think of the campaign so far? Well,
first of all, I think I agree with you because, as everybody knows, I've learned some economics in the last 4 years. I thought it was interesting that the cuts in national insurance seem to have made no headway at all with the public, whether they've even noticed. And as Liam has taught me, that the tax thresholds, have meant that people look like they're getting tax cuts, but they're being forced into a higher bracket. So we now have absurdities like teachers and nurses potentially going into the higher bracket. It was never intended for that. So what do we think of the Tory strategy so far? Well, I think they've gone to the cupboard of broken promises and dusted down a few of the old favourites. And it's basically, we've discussed this often on the podcast. I don't think there's any great enthusiasm for Labour, but what we've seen in 11 by-elections is the Labour vote barely going up, but the Tory vote very much staying at home or voting for reform. So they want now to motivate that great rump of people who absolutely loathe and despise them for the highest taxes for 70 years, for not building enough housing, all the unconservative things. So they've gone to the cupboard of broken promises, and they are really targeting the pensioners now. So we've had national service, which plays well, and then we had the triple lock on the pension. So
they're going to be bringing back powdered egg.
Yes.
Junkets.
Coffee.
That chicory stuff at the back of the cupboard.
I was thinking what we could look forward to the next thing, give everyone over 65 a cruise, maybe declare war on Germany. That would go down. People would be delighted with that, wouldn't they? So that strategy, we've had 3 polls this week. One of the polls, slightly outlying poll, was down to 12 points, the gap, but the other 2 polls, Survation poll,
20 odd, wasn't it?
Was 23 points.
Which is landslide territory, isn't it?
It is landslide territory, and I think I make a prediction now. You know how we like to get each other to eat our hats. I think it will be a very low turnout.
Yeah.
I think it may be a historic
Yeah.
low turnout. But I think that has Labour done enough to deserve a victory? We look at the Labour shadow front bench. We don't see some great statesman in waiting. I think there are about 5 or 6 people that we think might make serviceable ministers, but there isn't a great wealth of talent.
It's not 97, is it? I was a cub reporter on the FT in 97. It was my job to hang out with a bloke called Tony Blair, which no one had really heard of outside Westminster, and get to know his front bench. And whatever you thought of that Labour front bench, you know, many people in this room will have voted for Blair.
I did.
At least once, maybe twice or 3 times. His front bench contains some very serious people. You know, whatever you think of a Jack Straw, Mo Mowlam, Robin Cook,
Tessa Jowell.
Yeah, Gordon Brown for his sins, Tony Blair himself. I don't see anyone of the calibre of that on the Labour front bench. And I agree with you. I think turnout will be very low because it's like a sort of, you know, pygmy wrestling competition, isn't it? Rather than the sort of clash of political...
Not sure we're allowed to say that.
Political titans.
Can we have...
I think the turnout will be, it was 72 when Blair won his 179-seat majority in 1997. It could easily be 55% now, which is terrible for democracy.
Does anyone know, this is a trivia, does anyone know the biggest turnout in the last few decades? Can anyone guess?
Brexit referendum.
It was the Brexit referendum, and that really brought people out. And like you, Liam, I interviewed Tony Blair for the Telegraph magazine, and I think I described him as, every woman's favourite son-in-law. I mean, he was persuasive. We didn't think he was going to come and steal our money or do incredibly stupid things. I'm not sure anyone has that confidence with Labour. I mean, we could list the things that we're apprehensive about. I think they could bring in a blasphemy law. I think the sectarian politics we've seen at the local elections, that could go mad. I think despite the Hillary Cass's excellent report, I think they could ramp up...
Into trans
thing.
Activism,
I think they could... Annalisa Dodds, what a strange creature she is. I mean, sorry. But, talking about... this ban on conversion therapy, which is a misnomer, really, because obviously we don't want conversion therapy for children who are gay, because that would be absolutely horrible, and people used to do that. But what they're talking about, a ban on conversion therapy for youngsters who think they're trans, is basically no one is allowed to say to them, do you really think you should have your breasts lopped off? You're not... They're parents. And it's perfectly possible, Liam, that a Labour government will say parents aren't allowed because they will intrude into the family.
What's happened in certain Canadian states, isn't it? Parents have been prosecuted for trying to dissuade their children from, as you say, drastic surgery.
Now, it wouldn't be an episode of Planet Normal without some Velma.
Scooby-Doo! Yeah, Scooby-Doo! We are kids of a certain age, aren't we? And if it hadn't been for those pesky kids, I'd have got away with it.
We only do Velma now so that Liam can do the Scooby-Doo impersonation. But this is interesting, just something I picked up. So, of those intending to vote Labour, 51% said they most agree with the statement, I will be voting Labour to get rid of a Conservative government. Only 28% say they will vote Labour because they have the best vision for the country. And that, I think, seems to me... And I think we could see a majority Labour government with a very low mandate. And that's going to be very interesting going forward, isn't it? Because it could really kick off, I think, if as I suspect, I don't know if everyone here, I've spoken to several people in the last few days. Talk about election fever. It's more like an election sniffle, isn't it? People are talking about it. Get it over with. I mean, who wants a 6-week campaign with these people?
Election feeling a bit rough the next morning after a few pints. It doesn't feel very edifying for democracy. You and I often trade predictions on Planet Normal, don't we? And as you say, we enjoy proving each other wrong and being proud when the other one is right and so on. Say the Tories have got roughly 350 odd seats at the moment. They need 325 for a majority. They've lost a huge amount of their 80-seat majority through by-elections and so on, as Alison has mentioned. We now know there are signs that Nigel Farage is thinking, I don't know what Richard Tice thinks about this, about doing some kind of deal with the Tories. But let's just park that, because we don't know for sure. It's just a little bit of speculation this afternoon.
This afternoon, yeah.
Let's say Farage doesn't do that. What do you think the Tories will get now? 100, 150 seats?
I've been boring you for a long time because obviously I think I've got the best focus group in the country, which is the readers of the Daily Telegraph. And when you get the actual loyalists, the people who've been in the party since they were, 18, and the confidence and trust has gradually ebbed away, I think voters feel very ill-served. I don't know about anyone here. I think my own lowest moment was last year when the net immigration figures came out, and it was 745,000. And that was
the population of Sheffield in 1 year.
Population of Sheffield.
That's legal.
And that was from a government which, when David Cameron became Prime Minister, promised in its manifesto to get immigration down to tens of thousands. And I don't really think you should ever have to make this caveat, but it isn't a racist point, because a lot of immigrants and the children of immigrants and the grandchildren of immigrants, they are concerned about this. We cannot absorb that. We cannot integrate that many people that quickly. The latest figures have gone down from 745,000 to 680,000. Imagine what that means by the end of the decade. And Migration Watch has said basically by the mid-2030s, the population not born here will start to outnumber the native population. Culturally, where does that leave us? Our culture, our traditions, children are constantly being told they're terrible and iniquitous anyway. But I'm very, very concerned, and I think that the betrayal, the sense of betrayal, not the small boats particularly, I mean, that's just another example of the way that they've lost control of national security, but it's these relentlessly huge net immigration figures at a time when everybody knows you hard to see a doctor, can't see a dentist, rents are sky high. So all of that. So prediction. Okay, so if we keep Farage out of it, I think a lot of very prominent, they're thinking about 11 cabinet ministers will lose their seats. I think it could go below 100 seats.
Okay.
I really do. And
I reckon it's going to be nearer 150. But just before we move on, I just want to make very quickly 2 points. Firstly, I do think the debate on immigration, the needle has moved because of the pace. I think up until quite recently, it was very difficult to talk about numbers in terms of immigration. But now immigration is getting very tied in with the debate on the shortage of housing, on the fact that so many people in the country are fighting to see doctors, fighting to get school places and so on. I do think it's now part of sort of, the progressive, bien-pensant, polite society conversation that you can say, actually, we're Brits and we're an immigrant society, and look at all these people from all around the world, they've made us what we are and so on. But at this pace, the consent that supports our tolerance is being eaten away.
There's no consent for it. There hasn't been a single consent.
Not for this pace. Not for this pace.
Not for this
I
pace.
agree.
No,
and the other point I'd quickly make is, a lot of people in this room, a lot of people in the country may be a lot more concerned about the prospect of a Starmer government than they were the prospect of a Blair government, because of the relative calibre of the people in the opposition who have come to the fore. I would say this, and I remember from the 97 Parliament, when I was with Paddy Ashdown on election night, and as soon as that number came through, 179, he said, WTF and the rest of it, because he realised the whole idea of the Lib Dems and Labour combining in some kind of progress, it all gone. Blair didn't need anyone anymore. No. So Blair was actually able to be a lot less beholden to his left wing, because he had a big majority, and this is the danger. If Starmer gets a majority of 30 or 40, which many Conservatives would think, oh, that's great, only 34. That is actually when it'll have to be at its most radical, because there'll be 30 or 40 MPs, left-wing MPs, in the campaign group in the Labour Party on the backbenches, and every single bit of legislation he wants to get through, he'll need them if he's only got a small majority. So there you go. There's the essay question. Under what circumstances could a Labour government with a big majority be less radical than one with a small majority?
And today we've seen, I don't know, I listened to the lunchtime news, first 20 minutes of the BBC News was Diane Abbott. You know, she kept up to the party. And what struck me about the coverage was it was just relentlessly being disrespected because she's a black woman, right? That was not the issue. The issue was she put her name to a letter which contained repellent anti-Semitism, which said Jews were not victims of racism. 6 million cremated people would beg to differ on that, and said it was anti-Semitism was akin to prejudice against gingers, was the absolutely outlandish statement. I mean, she has apologised and she has gone on a course about anti-Semitism, but I think what we're seeing is a preview of forthcoming, not attractions, what's the opposite of an attraction? Anyway, forthcoming drawbacks, is that everything they see through the prism of identity politics. It was absolutely covered as though this was entirely to do with her race, and it was threatened by one speaker, the Afro-Caribbean community won't be very pleased with this. And we saw in the local elections, didn't we? In fact, this week, I thought the most outrageous video of this week, I don't know how many people saw it, was Angela Rayner in her constituency in Ashton-under-Lyne, basically, practically going down on her, practically taking the knee, Halligan, before a room full of Muslim guys saying, don't worry, we'll recognise Palestine. And the look of contempt on those men's faces, something you won't forget. Now, Labour is going to be on the hook to those guys and to lots of other identity groups. I think one thing we can look forward to in the election, lots of good Tories will lose their seats. Ian Duncan Smith, I think, has been an immensely good and compassionate person. We had an email from Planet Normal listener today who said, I really don't want to vote Conservative, but I will be voting Conservative because Danny Kruger is my
the MP for Devizes,
So I think a lot of us I'll be voting for Kemi Badenoch, who is my, our MP in our town. And I think some of us will be voting for Tories who are Conservative and giving the rest a break. But not many tears will be shed when the Chancellor of the Exchequer becomes the first Chancellor of the Exchequer to go under a bus.
Okay, let's move on. Let's introduce our first guest, because our first guest is, ladies and gentlemen, David Frost. He's a former cabinet minister. He served as a civil servant, a diplomat, a former ambassador. He was, of course, the UK's chief negotiator and the Prime Minister's advisor on Europe from 2019, ultimately resigning from government in December 2021. Born in Derby, brought up in Nottingham, David's carved out a reputation as a shrewd political strategist. He's got a strong following among voters, not only Tory supporters, but also in traditional Labour supporting seats. He's well versed in the subtleties of both Westminster and Whitehall, and he quit the government in protest, of course, in December 2021, given his concern about the UK's lockdown policy. He's appeared on Planet Normal several times. He's been kind enough to say publicly not only that he's an avid listener, but he's even been influenced by our idol banter co-pilot. Ladies and gentlemen, citizens of Planet Normal, please welcome to the stage Lord David Frost. David, great to have you with us. Thanks again for appearing on Planet Normal. Of course, you were at our last live event, which was our 120th. Great to have you back. There's speculation that you want to stand in this general election, renouncing your peerage, but you might not be allowed to. What can you tell us?
Not very much, I'm afraid, at this point. The PM said on Friday that I could apply, and the block had been lifted, so that opens possibilities. So there's a process underway, and I don't want to be too oblique about this, but honestly, I think we've got to let that play out and see where it takes us.
Why were you quotes, deferred in the first place?
So I don't know. It's never been made clear to me. One can speculate. And obviously I've not been possibly the most supportive member of the Conservative Party about the Prime Minister's current...
It's what writing the column for the Telegraph does to you. It's just, we're sort of programmed.
You were party to a study that got extensive coverage in which it was suggested that that Rishi Sunak was part of the problem, and that with a new leader going into the general election, it was worth a roll of the dice. Do you still believe that it would have been better?
So I've actually never called for the Prime Minister to go, although a lot of people have put the words in my mouth. For me, it's about the policies, and I think we have been, on a track that is really, in some ways going down the same track as the Labour Party, but at a slower pace, and we need to get onto a different path, and that's really what I was trying to say. And really, I've spent the last couple of years trying to do what little I can to stop the Conservative Party getting into the situation that it's now in. And it was entirely foreseeable that this would happen, and it has now happened. And we face a very difficult, serious situation that, that could be very dramatic for the party, unfortunately.
When Alison and I started Planet Normal 4 years ago, we've been talking about it for a few months. We conceived the whole idea of the two of us getting together to do this podcast before lockdown was even a thing, before any of us had ever heard of COVID-19. But of course, we launched the podcast. It became a kind of place where people who were concerned about lockdown, who dared to question lockdown, not to question vaccination and the principle of getting jabbed, not to question that, but to question the collateral damage of lockdown, the impact on cancer patients, the impact on NHS waiting lists for COVID-only service. Now, you were in government during that period, and ultimately you resigned just before this Christmas 2021. You really galvanised the COVID recovery group, the small group of almost entirely Conservative MPs in the Commons who were, I wouldn't say resisting, but just questioning lockdown. How did it feel to be in government that time? And just remind us, David, why it was that in the end you did resign.
Well, I mean, it was deeply, deeply frustrating because I could just see us doing the same thing again. We'd had the second and third lockdown the year before. We thought it was all over, and then we were going back down the same path. And although we had loads and loads more evidence, including some direct evidence about Omicron, it felt like it was, not being taken into account, not properly assessed, and we were just going to kind of rinse and repeat. And luckily, I and many others managed to stop that happening. But I do find it. I just don't really understand why the government machine never got itself into a position where it could properly assess, the fatality rate, the real risk of this to people, and look at it against the damage that was being caused. And
you work very closely with Boris. How much do you think, if he hadn't got such a bad dose of COVID himself, do you think his instincts were suspicious of lockdown?
I do think that, and I don't know to what extent him getting ill, played a direct role in what happened. Probably not much, I think. But I do think he always seemed to me to be a bit more questioning of it, certainly, than the kind of average minister around the table. But the thing about running a bureaucracy is you've got to get kind of process support, bureaucratic support, evidence to support your view. And he was Prime Minister. He could have set up a system that would generate that sort of debate, and he never did. And that was the problem.
Now, we know this COVID inquiry, so-called, is costing tens of thousands of pounds. A lawyer's bonanza paid for by us.
£300,000 a day.
Unbelievable.
How about giving it to some of the young people who were locked up during lockdown and
or helping them to buy houses or something? So we've having this inquiry. We see the Swedes, they do their inquiry in a few months. The Italians, even, not known for their bureaucratic efficiency, apologies to all our Italian friends, within a year. What is it about this country? We have these ridiculously drawn-out inquiries. And are you getting any sense from this inquiry, David, because I'm not, about lessons in terms of what we do next time? which is surely the cardinal point.
I said the Quango state gone mad, these inquiries. I mean, look, it took us, however long it was, 10 years to investigate the events of 15 minutes in Londonderry in 1970.
Bloody Sunday, yeah.
Yeah, so, goodness knows how long this is going to take. There are only 2 or 3 important questions to answer on this, and the core one is, did we do the right thing with lockdown? Did the benefits outweigh the cost? That is what we need to know. And I don't think we're going to get it out of this inquiry, unfortunately. They haven't asked me to appear, even though I think I'm the only person actually to have resigned in protest of the COVID policy. And I don't expect anything to emerge from it.
They haven't even asked Shanatra Gupta.
No.
Unbelievably, our leading epidemiologist.
Not only have they not asked Shanatra, but when Professor Carl Hennigan, the Professor of Evidence-Based Medicine at Oxford, and we had Carl on the podcast, people will remember, Carl was actually not just looking at the stats. Carl was going into care homes and hospitals. He was actually on the ground, and he was always very measured with us. As a journalist, you try to provoke someone to say something a bit, sort of sensational.
Do we?
We try. He refused. He's the most slightly taciturn, but very, very level. And at the COVID inquiry, he was treated with dripping contempt, while Professor Neil Ferguson, Dominic Cummings, Lee, whatever his name is, the PR guy, they were sort of
Lee Kane.
Lee Kane. It was like,
famous for dressing up as a chicken.
Yeah, but it was like, we're so lucky, we're so honoured to have you with us here today. I mean, it's just so biased. It's absolutely infuriating.
It's incredible. And I mean, one of the strange things about politics, this election campaign in politics just at the moment, is nobody's talking about COVID. This 400 billion debt just appeared from nowhere. All these consequences, all the sort of psychological effects that it had, for people not being able properly to talk to each other for 2 years. I think all this is still playing out, and yet it's like it never happened.
Kids,
nobody
the
wants
impact
to talk
on kids.
about it.
The very low, much lower percentage now of doctor's appointments that are actually in person compared to before COVID. The number of people on out of work benefits, millions more since COVID. And we're not talking about it. It's crazy.
I agree.
Can we project forward? So I know because you might be a Conservative Party candidate, you won't want to be too negative as we've been. But go on. Were the apocalypse to happen, how do you think that the Conservative Party as it is can reconstitute itself? Is there a fear that they will take a defeat as proof that they need to become more Jeremy Hunt and less Suella Braverman? I'm interested. And do you think that in the end there may be a breakaway movement if it can't get back on the track you spoke about?
I mean, it's hard to tell, is the honest answer. There's definitely, assuming that we don't win this election, there's definitely got to be a proper argument across the right of politics, beyond the Conservative Party, to kind of work out what is the USP, what do we actually stand for, and this is sometimes simplified down into an argument between sort of centre-left and centre-right within the party. I'm not sure that's entirely right. I think it's as much about, it's an argument between those parts of the party who think that basically we're going in the right direction. Okay, taxes could be lower maybe or whatever, but basically what the path we're on is okay. And those who think, no, we've got to change, we've got to undo some of what's been done, and we've got to go off in a different direction. And that's certainly where I am. And I think the electorate is owed a choice. And, we haven't had the manifestos yet, so let's see what comes out of them. But, what's happened to the great ideological arguments? What is the choice that is being put before voters at this election, the two different visions of Britain? I'm just not sure. And we can't let that happen again. By the next election, there's got to be clarity. If you vote Conservative, what sort of country are you voting for?
But we'll all remember, at the last Conservative Party conference when Prime Minister got up to give his speech. And literally, of all the things that are worrying people around the country, he chose introducing the International Baccalaureate. They speak of nothing else in Darlington. Bring on the International Baccalaureate. And
I was expecting the Cones hotline to turn up any minute.
and then he said about this, kids quitting smoking in 30 years or something. And I thought, have you looked outside? Have you spoken to anyone down the shops who's saying, the packet of butter's got smaller and costs another 30p? It's been David, what planet are they on?
Not planet normal.
Not planet.
No, I don't know. I mean, these policies, if you ask people to list what are the top 100 problems facing the country, then the smoking ban and A-level reform would not be in that list, I think.
But he majored on those.
No, there's just so much that needs to be done. Housing, immigration, the whole net zero thing, tax and spend, NHS, the Equalities Act, free speech, government reform, all this kind of thing. We are simply not putting a proposition before people. We're not having an argument about it. And I just find it baffling, because when you go out and talk to people, this is actually what they want to talk about. That's what's on their minds, in my experience, when I go around talking to voters and Conservatives. Those are the things they want to hear something about.
I think people everyone who writes into us, people are hungry for a vision. They want to feel.
People want to be led.
They want to feel proud of their country. Where are the leaders? We were talking. David and I were talking about this in the green room. I mean, they're making a big pitch at the moment to. You were out of the room. we tried to exclude you as much as possible, but we were. That obviously they're making this big pitch to pensioners, but. We've heard from lots of people who are older people. They're concerned about the younger generation. Yeah. They're concerned about their children and grandchildren. And I think the younger generation has been really let down, given such a raw deal, coming out of COVID, a virus which barely laid a glove on them, very bleak, been told their country is basically a racist hellhole. I mean, why don't they do the right? Why have the Conservative government not done the right thing by young people and said, we're going to build more houses? Because everybody wants, the Englishman's home is still his castle, isn't it?
I mean, obviously, we need to build lots more houses. There's no way around that problem. We need to reduce immigration as well, obviously, to make it palatable to people. But it's got to happen. It's just got to happen. And, there's no point in fencing around that question. Why it doesn't happen is because if we are not careful, the Conservative Party becomes the party of the people who are doing all right, the wealthy, the people with assets, the people who sort of, have lots to lose, don't want to take any risks about anything. And unfortunately, that's not how you build a successful, dynamic, growing economy. That, unfortunately, that's a lot of, the base that we are playing to at the moment.
Time presses on. We must move on. Before Alison introduces our next guest, a couple of things. First thing, if you do want to, David Frost is going to stay with us during the Q&A, as is our next guest after the interval. If you want to submit a question, the instructions are on there. Just while Alison's composing herself, David, very briefly, Boris Johnson probably better than anyone in frontline politics. Is he going to come back into the House of Commons? Do you want him to? Two-word answer. What I do.
I doubt that he is, to be honest, at least at this election. And he's a great guy. I loved working with him. I wish it could happen again. So yes, I guess.
Wow.
It could.
There you go. Hold the front page.
If we are in the middle of a culture war, then our next guest is one of the few people I would gladly follow into battle. The author of 17 novels, including the international bestseller we need to talk about, Lionel Shriver, has rightly been called a brutally fearless writer. Her books include So Much for That, a biting critique of the US healthcare system, and my personal favourite, The Mandibills, which was cheerfully described by Lionel as an acid satire in which everything bad that can happen has happened. If that sounds a bit heavy going, Lionel's novels are laced with a deliciously sly wit and feature many laugh out loud moments in her brilliant new novel, Mania, which Liam and I absolutely loved. She turns her Swiftian eye on social hysteria, moral panics, and cancel culture. Now, Lionel described herself to me in an email as notoriously obstreperous. But to use a well-loved Planet Normal catchphrase, she is most splendidly and defiantly orthogonal to the orthodoxy. Ladies and gentlemen, round of applause for Lionel Shriver, please.
You go first. You go first. Woo!
I told you buy a lot of books, so that's why she's
So you didn't get that hay on why, did you?
Almost. You'd be surprised. Even in hay.
Lionel, the novel starts in 2011. The mental parity movement has asserted that stupid people have exactly the same talents as the intellectually gifted. So words such as stupid and even smartphone are forbidden. A boss is not allowed to point out someone is illiterate. Anyone can get into medical school with predictable consequences. Your heroine, who I'm delighted to reveal, is called Pearson Converse, which could be my avatar, basically. She works at a university where she gets into big trouble for teaching Dostoevsky's The Idiot. Did you have a particular social hysteria in mind, or was it a kind of cumulative observation on what seemed to be this multiple now panics coming at us?
For the most part, I had in mind the sum of their parts. That is, we've gone through, since about 2012, multiple social hysterias, or as I call them here, manias. It was about 2012 when suddenly transgenderism exploded on our television screens, and I was seeing continual documentaries about little boys in dresses. Seemed to come out of nowhere. We went through all of that turmoil over the Me Too movement, which went completely international. There's the Black Lives Matter stuff, which simply exploded after the George Floyd death, and of course lockdowns were a kind of social mania. And what was interesting about those is they were a governmental mania. That all the countries copied each other. So I'm interested in this phenomenon of suddenly everyone thinks the same thing and says the same thing, where 10 minutes before everyone would have thought it was complete baloney. And I find it frightening, honestly. The book is in many regards lighthearted. Certainly the satire is. There's a personal element which is quite sincere and serious. But on the one hand, yes, we sometimes have these big fads for hula hoops, and it just tightens up our hip muscles. But then there's the fad for Nazism or COVID lockdowns, and I am worried about our species' vulnerability to groupthink and mass conformity, and it is a weakness in us as human beings.
Yeah, I think this is I think that's exactly right. I think a lot of what Alison and I talked about on the podcast during lockdown, and what a lot of the emails we received from our listeners reflected, was just shock at how quickly otherwise intelligent people craving respectability and security and conformity could start advocating really stupid things and really getting on the case of their neighbours and their friends and people they love if they didn't instantly agree with them. You talked about the personal. I loved the book. At the centre of the book is this relationship between Converse, Pearson, great name, and Emery Ruth. These people go, I won't give away spoilers, but these two women are very, very, very close because of circumstances of childhood. Their relationship is very moving, and they fall out in the most spectacular way over this. We're columnists. We know what it's like to have to give opinions for a living regularly. Sometimes you lose friends. Have you lost friends because of cancel culture? And in that sense, was this book partly autobiographical?
Oh, entirely. I've lost a couple of good friends. And one of the reasons that I wanted to use this book to work that through is not just because I'm too cheap to pay for therapy. But lots of people have lost friends, or during the last dozen years, have family members who won't speak to them anymore.
Have the friends you've lost, are they going to read the book? Do you want them to?
Oh, I guarantee you that they will not.
Oh, that bad.
Right?
Yeah.
So the thing about the Pearson's friend is that she is in the media and she basically happily surfs the wave of any new fashionable opinion. So Pearson who is sticking to the fact that, people should be allowed to do crosswords because they're good at them and all.
But we don't want to make people who don't get the answers right feel bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's an extension of that.
She's a bit stroppy, this Pearson character, isn't she?
Imagine.
But it's an extension of that very, I think, very dubious phrase, which we was enjoined during, the whole sort of trans thing, which is be kind, right? Now, be kind, I think, it's a very dubious thing, isn't it? Because it means anyone who says, I don't think children should have puberty blockers when they may just be confused or gay or will grow out of it. Be kind, no debate, Stonewall said. No debate in a free democratic society. I mean, is that part of it?
Oh, yes. Well, I'm very suspicious of the lingo that gets used, especially on the left, because it usually, black means white. So be kind is all about using cruelty. The left has been using compassion as a cudgel. And it's like, you're going to be nice if I have to put you in prison over it. I don't believe in legislating for good character. And I think that the wokesters are bullies. And they believe in coercion, which is because, yes.
And character assassination.
Indeed.
Even worse than coercion.
Oh,
coercion, there's an element of rhetoric and argument and weighing of evidence. Character assassination is just thuggery.
Oh, I agree. And these, they're so convinced of their own virtue that they will break any law, break any natural, moral law in order to get what they want because they are incapable of sin themselves.
Yeah. Charlie Robinson, who's in the audience, who is Planet Normal statistician and also daughter, Kate.
Assistant statistician.
Assistant statistician.
Because you're the statistician.
Oh, yeah, I am, obviously. During lockdown, particularly whenever I was worried about, as Liam will tell you, not the surest on some of these mathematical things, but Charlie was there, and Kate, his brilliant teenage daughter, who would just run the numbers to make sure. And also, of course, I think here tonight, somewhere among us, is George, our NHS insider, who is throughout. Yeah. I was thinking earlier that George is the only person I'm prepared to call they, them, for reasons of anonymity. But of course, during COVID, I'd be watching the daily press briefing and they'd say, these hospitals are overrun. And I would just text George and say, is that hospital overrun? And within about 3 minutes, it would say, no, it isn't. And also, as we remember, the astonishing massaging of the hospital admission figures, which turned out to be not people admitted with COVID. Latterly, they've actually admitted, I think even at the COVID inquiry, somebody recently said that actually it was people who just happened to test positive and were going into hospital for something else. And the particular cherry on the cake, I think, is that about a third of the people were given COVID by the hospital. But you know, you and I, we got to know each other really. I'm sure people here, we were a sort of a band of rebels, weren't we? Really, what were we?
Yes, I think
COVID deniers.
That was one of the only nice things about the period. Is that look, we all found each other.
Yeah. Good.
But now, it must be said, what you were arguing, Lionel, in The Spectator, I think The Spectator did a good job during lockdown in the main. I think our paper in the main did a good job.
Yeah.
But what we were saying on Planet Normal, what were we doing? We were reporting what people at Macmillan Cancer Trust were telling us. We were reporting what NHS insiders like George were telling us.
And I think Professor Carol Sikora, a hero of mine, is in the audience tonight. Can we just salute? I mean, fantastic.
We were doing what Alison and I came into journalism to do, which was to be really, really curious rather than instantly judgmental and find evidence and talk about it, particularly if powerful people didn't want us to talk about it. And that's what journalism is. And everything else, frankly, is advertising, as the old adage goes. And what we were saying then now has become completely mainstream. Yes, there were big collateral damage to lockdown, not least for young people. That's now become mainstream. But in journalism, you know, there's no upside in being early and being first. You're just remembered as awkward, difficult, rather than being lauded, certainly by our own profession.
I think we are awkward and difficult now, aren't we?
Well, maybe you are.
I think RC covers the co-pilots quite well. So I found this quote of Dostoevsky, which fits Lionel's book perfectly. Tolerance will reach such a level that intelligent people will be banned so as not to offend the imbeciles. We won't do any spoilers, but the novel has some measure of vindication for standing against the tide, but are you gloomy, and do you think the band of rebels may need to get back together if we plunge into a Labour government?
I think we need to keep each other's phone numbers.
Is she going to read out?
Yes.
Yes.
Will you read us the small? Will you read it's all fantastic, but will you give us a little bit of a taste of it?
Okay, I'll give you a little sampler. It's actually from near the end of the book. And, you know, in literary festivals, I often try to emphasize how that there's a big difference between the author and the character. But in this instance, I'm going to confess that there is no difference. And the conclusion that my narrator comes to is, I'm sorry to say, the conclusion I came to throughout our mutually unpleasant COVID experience. I'll speak for myself, though I doubt this recalibration is unique to me. Watching an entire population swallow whole a transparently lunatic proposition and then jubilantly embrace a raft of ruinous new social conventions has profoundly lowered my estimation of people in general. I hesitate to exempt myself from that category too, so I suppose this disappointment extends to yours truly. If people as a class are far less impressive than we'd like to think, then I am unimpressive too. But something difficult to pinpoint does distinguish me from most people, and if you're still reading this, you probably land in the same genetic camp. I don't understand, honestly, why I was born with a funny immunity to the dogmatic diseases that so easily infect our fellows, any more than I understood why certain phenotypes were unaffected by COVID-19. I'm loath to claim membership of a Jehovah's Witness-like elect, and maybe I'd have been a more contented person these last 13 years if I'd mindlessly followed the crowd. After all, I've paid a terrible price for being out of sync. I've lost my home, my lover, my job, my reputation, several years of my older children's upbringing, and perhaps contact with my youngest child in perpetuity. All I can say is that I was made this way. I'm congenitally incapable of reciting with a shrug, "Oh, there's no such thing as stupid people. My mistake." Please, I don't mean that I'm anointed. Besides, if a larger proportion of our species had my obtuse temperament, we might suffer from chronic social incohesion and get into far more scraps, both between countries and in bars. Maybe our institutions would be paralyzed by staff at constant loggerheads. Obviously, we can't all be obstreperous in a populous, complex society that requires a high degree of interpersonal cooperation even to keep milk in our fridges. All of us can't wake up in the crib and decide to rebuild every custom, every shared communal truth from the ground up. It's possible, too, that I myself have unquestioningly accepted a host of assumptions that are irrational, destructive, or yes, stupid. I'd love to give you an example, but because I have accepted these assumptions, I don't even know what they are. Still, I'm straining here, because by this point, it's indisputable that human beings will believe anything. Accordingly, a wide variety of historical phenomena that once confounded me now seem explicable, if not ordained. I'm no longer astonished by the Holocaust, and there's no country in the world that I would deem impervious to the modern equivalent of a Nazi takeover. Rather, I figure that full-blown fascism in, say, the US, the UK, Australia, France, or modern Germany, for that matter, could manifest itself within approximately 3 weeks. Mao's Cultural Revolution, Stalin's labor camps, Cambodia's killing fields. They now strike me as perfectly normal. Likewise, the cult of Scientology, Jonestown, Waco, and the Jehovah's Witnesses I grew up with. I'm not in the least surprised that some people think a single drop of tincture diluted by 100,000 gallons of water will cure cancer, that the murder of small children will protect them from the devil, or that we are eternally living in the end times, after which exactly 144,000 people will ascend to heaven and rule the earth in concert with Jesus Christ. Backhandedly, I have come to give my Jehovah's Witness parents a bit more credit. Sure, what they believed was nuts, but that merely made them just like everybody else.
Ladies and gentlemen, Lionel Shriver.
Now, over the past 4 years, Planet Normal has received some pretty consequential emails and hosted some eye-catching guests. You may recall that in June 2020, Sir Richard Deal, our former head of MI6, came aboard the rocket to tell us that he had strong evidence that COVID was an engineered escapee from the coronavirus big clue laboratory in Wuhan.
Yeah. That Planet Normal story drove headlines around the world, making the front page of the New York Times, no less, even though what we were saying was strenuously denied by various governments, not least because the UK, US, and other Western governments, it's a matter of public record, had been funding that Wuhan lab.
Yeah.
But since then, the FBI, no less, has said that the most likely origin of COVID-19 was indeed a Chinese government-controlled lab. No one's saying that the Chinese let COVID escape deliberately, but it does now seem undeniable that the ghastly virus didn't, in fact, jump from bats to humans in a medieval wet market, but was actually man-made as part of broader research into viruses, and the virus then escaped.
Another Planet Normal interview that stands out, it derived from an email that we received in September 2020 in the depths of lockdown, and it made both the co-pilots cry. It was from a Planet Normal listener called Robert Styler, and I remember could hardly read it out on the podcast, but I'm going to try. Josephine and myself have recently celebrated our diamond anniversary from being teenage sweethearts to 83-year-old sweethearts, wrote Robert. Sadly, my wife is incarcerated in a very expensive nursing home, paid for by our lifetime of careful saving. She's suffering from dementia, and the love of my life I have not been able to hold in my arms since March. As each day passes, our connection becomes more tenuous as she fails to connect with me on FaceTime, a form of torture for a person with dementia, and I am no longer able to see her even in an outside location.
I live alone, Robert continued in his email, and take great care to limit exposure to this virus, and I certainly pose a lot less risk to my beloved Josephine and her fellow care home inmates compared to the staff who come and go every day at home with their families, mixing with a wide range of the public. All I ask, wrote Robert Styler, is to be able to be with her, to physically touch her, to take care of the little personal things that I know she needs. Now, Robert's email was heartbreaking. You cried reading it out.
Well, I had to let you take over.
And then I started crying as well. These things aren't scripted.
No.
Robert was asking very powerfully that the COVID tests that were justifying the complete closure and isolation of his wife's care home to visitors were riddled with false positives. As Josephine's life unfortunately ebbed away, Robert wondered aloud if he would ever be in the living presence of his beloved wife again.
Now, having read out a series of emails from Robert, Liam and I invited him onto the rocket as our interviewee. Many of you will remember that. It prompted a flood of correspondence from others in the same predicament. I remember one from the daughter of a cancer sufferer. She said, "My dad won't go into hospital because he wants to die with us and he doesn't think they'll let him." So he was in tremendous pain, but he wanted to stay at home. And the Telegraph itself covered the story with beautiful pictures of Robert and Josephine. I wrote an open letter to Helen Whately, then the social care minister. Interesting in those leaked WhatsApp messages, Matt Hancock, that Helen Whately was seen trying to persuade Hancock to have a more lenient approach to people. But so I was asking Helen Whately for relatives like Robert to have key worker status so they could be tested daily and go into homes. We also joined forces with a fantastic campaigning group, Rights for Residents, who had a petition which, quote, calls on the government to find a humane solution which balances the risk of contracting COVID-19 against the devastating mental and physical deterioration we are witnessing.
The story of Robert and Josephine via our little rocket of right thinking, our capsule of common sense, had a huge impact. It was literally the subject of discussion by cabinet ministers day to day, not least due to our efforts. And there was, I believe, as a result of Robert's email and our response to it, and your incredible responses to our response, there was some thawing in the very draconian rules. Robert, we are delighted to report, was allowed to see his 83-year-old sweetheart for one last dinner, for one last dance. And today, of course, we're seeing the vast collateral damage of lockdown that none of us were allowed to talk about, the mental health catastrophe among millions of kids and young people, the 8 million strong NHS waiting list, the trouble so many of us now have to see a doctor in person, the huge number of excess deaths, the harm, the inflation from printing 450 billion quid to fund it all. But what we must never forget, ladies and gentlemen, is that the cruelty that was inflicted on people, particularly younger people, denied access to their friends, locked up in their bedrooms, and older people who were never given a choice of whether they could take their chances with COVID and go on seeing the people that they loved. That's what happened during lockdown.
And we're delighted to say that Robert Styler, the man whose story so many of you have followed and who inspired that huge, huge change, is with us tonight. Robert, where are you? Please stand up, darling, please. Where is he? Can you stand up?
Go and shake his hand. Go on.
I'll give you a kiss because it's too far. Hello, darling.
So much.
Oh, thank you so much. And we are delighted that not only is Robert here, but his grandchildren, Tom and Anna C, are with him. And I hope you're very proud of your grandpa because he's amazing. So where are we now?
Who says journalism doesn't make a difference?
Well, it's not just journalism. We are the mouth. We have been the megaphone
Of you
for all, the citizens of Planet Normal. We're just delighted that we can perform that function, aren't we?
We are. And now after that tearjerker, as we so often do on Planet Normal, we delve deep into the barrel of mirth and fun. Now, I have no idea who Bob the Bard is. I mean, Bob the Bard could be some AI construct, manufactured by the Chinese to distract Britain's leading intellectuals as they go on
He's William Shakespeare reborn. Come on.
podcast flights of fantasy. But I do know that Bob the Bard, not his real name, writes fantastic poems for Planet Normal. He's a multiple serial Planet Normal mug winner. He's got more mugs, rare as rocking horse poo as they are, than Alison and I combined, and Bob isn't even his real name. Now, I'm pleased to say that before we come on to our question and answer session, Bob, who along with Alison's cat, my Scooby-Doo impressions, the co-pilot's attempt to turn herself from a maths O-level failure into a trained statistician by pretending she's Scooby's brainy sidekick Velma, Bob has somehow become part of the Planet Normal furniture, and he has indeed offered up a new contribution, especially for tonight. Hooray! Congratulations on your 200th episode, Alison and Liam, wrote Bob. If you want to win a mug, guys, this is how. I'm afraid I've decided to mark the occasion by writing yet another dreadful poem which contains a new word for the Planet Normal lexicon. Now, Alison mentioned earlier the wonderful Shanetra Gupta, who, while talking to us about her woes of being an Oxford professor and being completely ignored by our entire political and media
The world's
establishment,
leading expert on coronaviruses. Right.
she once said to us that she did acknowledge that her views were, and what a phrase, somewhat orthogonal to the orthodoxy. Now, when I was doing maths O-level, orthogonal meant at 90 degrees to, right? At right angles to, so that's what it means. And Bob the Bard has invented a new word, orthogonaut. Noun, one who is proud to be orthogonal to the orthodoxy, e.g. the crew of the Capsule of Common Sense, the Rocket of Right Thinking, the Flying Refuge of Reasoned Views, which is Planet Normal. Thank you for 200 fantastic episodes, said Bob. Let's hope we have many more. And here it is, the orthogonauts.
Shall we read it in different verses?
Yeah. Do you want to flee the madness we see on planet Earth? Then climb aboard the rocket of merriment and mirth.
Come to Planet Normal. The atmosphere is great, with diversity of opinion and civilized debate.
There's fascinating stowaways and entertaining chat. There's Velma, and there's Scooby, and a certain Turkish cat.
It's a planet free of pronouns, our sanctuary in the sky, untainted by net zero, and the scourge of DEI.
So come to Planet Normal, where you're free to share your thoughts with Alison and Liam. I'm just reading out what's here, guys. Our brave orthogonauts.
Hey.
Okay, questions.
Yeah. We've had a lot of pre-submitted questions, and I was commenting on the high quality of these questions. So this is from Jennifer. Why was CCHQ put totally unsuitable people in charge of choosing candidates to replace departing Conservative MPs? No comment from Lord Frost. Still hoping he's in with a chance. I have heard of several applicants with impeccable credentials over the years, totally overlooked in favour of the woke brigade. I will vote Tory only because Danny Kruger is our MP. It's no use saying only the Conservatives can stop Labour. This would be true if the Tory party was represented by Conservatives rather than a Social Democrat majority. The country would not be in this mess otherwise. I cannot think of better individuals, says Jennifer, to represent us than the three of you, with Lionel Shriver writing a weekly column in the Daily Telegraph. And Jennifer says, thank you for reminding us weekly that we were sane after all. And she says, disillusioned of Wiltshire. And can we just go quickly to Harry, who I met at the Winston Churchill statue on Armistice Day, actually. My question is a simple one, says Harry. What cause for hope does the younger generation have? Houses seem to cost at least 10 times our salaries. Rent prices are absurd. Universities took our tuition fees and decided not to teach us. The news is often full of doom and gloom. Yeah. News is often full of doom and gloom, so it would be great to hear some good news for a change. Lionel, what hope for the younger generation? Come on.
Long silence. No, honestly, the hope for the younger generation is the people who have taught them to be independent thinkers. And some of those people are here today.
Yeah.
And there's, the educational establishment is supposed to be doing that, and it won't do it anymore. It's become a brainwashing establishment. And therefore, actually, there's more pressure on parents and grandparents than there ever has been before, because you have to do the jobs of the universities and get your kids to think for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
David, hope for the younger generation?
Yeah, I mean, we've got to do what's necessary. I don't join those who say Gen Z is kind of, irretrievably woke and so on. I think every generation...
Don't mention avocado sandwiches.
Every generation is good as any other. We've got to put in place the policies that will make a difference. House buying, education, all that sort of thing. It's up to us. That we have the power at the moment. We are the generations that can design the policies to make a difference, and we haven't.
Okay, I've got some questions here on the Slido. So the first question is kind of to me, but I'll put it to you as well, David. And that is, Liam, what's the first thing you'd do if you became Chancellor? The first thing I would do is I would raise the starting rate of tax to 20p to take more people out of taxation. You get rid of loads of benefit tapers. You get rid of literally thousands, tens of thousands of people hours of administering benefits in either direction. You give people on lower wages a clear incentive. If they work, they and their families will be much, much, much better off. What do you do?
There's so much, I don't really know where to start. We've got to get the tax and spend levels down. That's where I would focus. It's just creeping up, and I would try and resist this assumption that taxes can only ever go up because the population's aging. We've got to find spending cuts. We've got to do things in a different way. So tax and spend seriously down and quickly.
And this one's for Lionel, if I may. This is from Sally. Lionel, fantastic book. You said conformity and groupthink is a human weakness. Do you think we will have more manias as confidence in our culture, truth, and reality reduces?
I think we're going to have more manias. That's why I said to keep each other's phone numbers. There's more of this to come. Part of it is driven by the internet, obviously. Otherwise, human weakness. And I don't think this is over, and we can't actually anticipate what comes next. And what I would say is that I think we're in the middle of one of them already, which is the climate change hysteria.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons I would identify it as an hysteria is that a distinguishing feature of these hysterias is it doesn't permit any dissent. And the climate change crowd basically wants to squelch all even scientific differences of opinion. We've got a media that has latched on to a single line of thinking and argument and set of so-called facts. Same thing happened in COVID, right? They were all singing from the same hymn sheet. And
if the media aren't challenging groupthink, where's it going to come from, Lionel?
Well, the media and the state are now in league. I know that sounds like a conspiracy theory. I think it's a fact.
I think we think on Planet Normal that the realities of Ed Miliband powering the UK on wind alone.
A certain kind of wind.
Alison, we've known each other a while. I mean, there's no one here. I have to ask you this question. Are you a state agent?
Me.
Or an estate agent? But I don't know whether...
I'm buying an electric generator because I actually think that under Labour we have a strong chance of power cuts. We've got a few small, quick ones which are funny. Paul says, how can I talk to people under 30 without sounding like a conspiracy theorist, which is a big question. And Catherine asked a question after my own heart. Who or where is our Javier Milei? Where is a man with a chainsaw to take,
Yeah.
Absolutely. But I think that, this is interesting from Jose. Given how Europe is shifting to the alternative right, don't we regret having left the EU, given that we could be leading that popular democratic upheaval? No. It's true, David, isn't it, that as we're possibly now about to elect a Labour government, a lot of Europe is going for the right, isn't it? I mean, so why are we not? And B, was that a mistake if, in fact, Europe becomes more right-wing than us?
So, there's obviously a reaction against whoever was in charge during the various crises, and that's what we're seeing here and in Europe. I do think that, Brexit is about democracy. Obviously, self-government is always better, even if there are allies of your colour somewhere else. And I don't think myself that this shift to the right across Europe will last very long. I don't myself think it'll make much difference to the direction of Europe, which has deep in its EU DNA the direction of centralising control towards federalism. I don't think they'll be able to stop that. They may be able to slow it for a bit. So, self-government, choosing your own way forward, making your own choices, having proper debate about them, that is still the best way forward.
You've been a senior diplomat in Greece, in Denmark. You were in our embassy in Paris for a long time. I think, it really is worth outlining what's going to happen in Europe with these elections this summer. If you look at the opinion polls, it's scary what's happening in Germany, in Holland, in Denmark, in Sweden, in Spain.
Why is it scary?
It's scary because you're getting a complete political configuration, and I don't think any of their establishments, and certainly not their medias, are remotely prepared for what's about to happen. No,
and there is a kind of unpleasant tinge, I would say, to at least some of the sort of right forces in Europe, definitely. But it's what I always thought would happen. And we're seeing it happen, which is that if you can't change things at elections, then people move from the mainstream parties to those who say you can change things if you vote for us. You'll get a move from the mainstream out to both extremes, and that's exactly what we're seeing. And I'm not at all surprised, because in most EU countries, you can't change things by voting. You've got to persuade the Commission, you've got to persuade everybody else. It's extremely difficult.
Nick says, is mediocre bureaucracy so entrenched in the UK that we are now as controlled as we would be in a communist state? Lionel, what do you think about that?
Well, certainly we were controlled more than in a communist state during COVID, and what was frightening about that is that if they can do it once, they can do it again. So the capitulation on a popular level during that period was a permanent sacrifice of our civil rights.
We've had, obviously Suella Braverman's here, Priti Patel, various people who've been in the Home Office, David, have said that it's extremely hard to get these policies that people have voted for through the civil service. I mean, is that a big problem? Is it an issue?
Oh, it is an issue. I think it's not the only issue, that's for sure. I think the Home Office has a particularly bad case, to be honest, of an obstructive and difficult bureaucracy. And, you know, it's a very dysfunctional department. We know that. But, of course, you know, the problem on things like the ECHR, for example, is that, you know, we don't have a mandate. It wasn't in the manifesto. It's something that's kind of developed since then, and you've got to make the case for it. And in those circumstances, you get resistance.
Will leaving the ECHR be in this Conservative manifesto?
Good question.
Steady.
A girl can dream.
I wouldn't like to speculate.
You do know how to chat up a man, Alison. I've always said that. Here's one for you, Lionel. Unfortunately, it's from Anonymous. It's a very good question. Lionel, how can ordinary folk be more openly PC critical and brave, like Pearson Converse in your fabulous new book, rather than conformist like Emery Ruth, without fear of workplace or social reprisal?
That is a good question. And it's a question that the book itself takes very seriously. There's a scene in the book where Pearson has assigned the idiot to her class, and she was reported, and she's brought before the Dean of Cognitive Equality. And
she manages to ascribe the book without even saying its name, comically.
So we would like to see our heroine stand up for herself and for truth and for literature and her own dignity. But at the end of that interview, she ends up crawling on her belly like a reptile because she needs to keep her job, and she needs to pay her mortgage, and she has to support 3 children. So I'm not naive about this stuff. It's very, it's a lot easier for me. I'm not institutionally dependent. I don't have a regular job. I'm really kind of a worthless layabout.
Highly
but
productive
if you have regular employment and they're bringing in DEI and you have to sign all these statements and you have to put pronouns in your emails, it's not easy to make a stand. And so I actually don't have an easy answer for that. I think to be glib about it would be unfair to people in that position.
I think casting a spotlight on it, I know people here will know of Toby Young and the great work of the Free Speech Union, and they are fighting case by case, and they are winning. They are starting to win. And the more cases that they win when people have spoken out and been sacked or so on, and I do think that they are fantastic.
Yeah, so maybe part of the answer is to donate to the Free Speech Union.
Very good idea.
Yeah.
Just a little one. And just briefly, another part of the answer is a word that elicited a ripple of applause before, which is leadership. Look at how the Cass report, a really well-written report into the whole trans activism debate.
Sea change.
It's completely changed the dial. It's moved the needle, all the journalistic cliches you want, just because An unanswerably authoritative report came out that didn't pull its punches, and the government didn't immediately poo-poo it. They waited to see how it landed. They still haven't said it's amazing. They're still waiting to see. But columnists, the public, we had so many emails about it. A well-written investigation and some political leadership can help people in the public who are trying to do the right thing. And yet there's so little of that leadership.
And we did see Labour. We saw Wes Streeting, saying, apologising, because in the past he said some of these things and he wanted to apologise, and he absolutely supported the Cass report, and that was not all, but lots of the frontline Labour people. So I do think that Cass now is a kind of sort of moral sort of high tide watermark of these things, and I think it will be much harder, and it'd be very interesting with Starmer, who, what did he say? How many men were women? 90 was it 1% or something? Anyway, so
and he still hasn't apologised to Rosie Duffield.
No.
By the way,
he certainly
which
has.
we will continue to push for.
Certainly has. Someone in the interval came up and said that they loved listening to the podcast and the humour, but where was the hope? And we've got several questions on that theme. Barry says, now a realisation is dawning in our society of the attack on ours and Western culture, history, education and general standards. Is there any hope of a fight back? And ditto, Alistair, following the Tory party's likely trouncing at the general election, what do the panel think is the future for conservatism in the UK? David, what cause for hope? Is there going to be also a future of conservatism?
A David Frost leadership.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's a lot. There really is hope, because I do. For one thing, I think there's a bit of a pushback beginning to happen against all these things. But I think the Conservative Party in the country and Conservative voters more broadly actually, are a pretty sound bunch of people, based bunch, as the young people say nowadays, and. I think that is a strong basis to build on. So, but it does require people to stand up. And as you were just saying, Lionel, I don't trivialise this, but people have got to say what they think. If nobody says what they think, then we're not going to shift this. And one of the encouraging things is people are in their own spheres beginning to say what they think, and that is the fundamental.
Well, there's that terrible phrase, isn't there? Am I still allowed to say that? I mean, I think we absolutely have to, and obviously Liam and I do that in our.
Well, when you go ahead and say it, then you're demonstrating that you're allowed to say it.
Yeah,
that's right.
That's true.
The hope is in this room, in that sense, not just in this room, but if you're a member of a party or not. The hope is in intelligent human dissent, and that doesn't mean thinking that people who disagree with you are evil and cancelling them. It means listening to them, weighing evidence and arguing back in a way that's civilised. And it's so rare. And I'd like to just say here how proud I am to be part of Planet Normal, how proud I am of Alison, and also of the Telegraph, who have let us do this. The Telegraph is a mainstream publication. It's one of the most revered newspapers in the world. It's the biggest selling broadsheet in this country during the week, which is not to be sniffed at. And yet we have been able to say things that haven't been mainstream, that have then become mainstream. And that is what hope is about, that there are people around who are willing to risk their own reputations and their own comfort and even friendships in some case, in order to say what they think is right.
It has to be so. Oh, sorry. Thank you. It has to be said that these bodies exert, very, very powerful influence. So our own press regulator doesn't actually specify, but you'll have noticed that lots of the papers and the media are now referring to Eddie Izzard as a woman or whatever. Now, I refuse, and I wrote a column about this person called a pregnant man, and I referred to him as she, because a man can't be pregnant. Okay, that is absolutely not possible. And somebody very dutiful changed all the pronouns in my piece. And
imagine being that person, and she rings.
Yeah. Yeah, don't mess with me, mate, I tell you. But I and then all the comments underneath from our
rightly
readers
so.
said, Alison, why are you calling it? So I then obviously rang up and said, these will be changed back immediately. But it's not easy because
No, it isn't.
and the reason...
You get no thanks for it.
No, but the reason...
You get penalised.
The reason it's easier to go
Journalists.
along with it, Liam, is because a lot of these types we've been discussing, they make constant vexatious complaints, all right? And the complaints then require a huge amount of time, of staff, so it's easier. It's easier to go with the flow and call these people what they like. So it does take, but I think that tide is turning, and I think it's been interesting actually that if Keir Starmer, for example, does become Prime Minister and he has any hope of governing well and having a second term, he is going to be up against the sensible people in the Red Wall who think a lot of this stuff is absolute bollocks.
Yeah.
So, they do, You don't get many girls in Newcastle, sort of deciding that they're a bloke. I mean, they want to pull somebody, So I think there is hope still in the common sense of the British people.
Here's one for David from Nick. Thank you for all your questions. There's been so many. I'm sorry we haven't got more time. I think most people in the room would agree that Sweden, says Nick, is better at managing pandemics than we are. Which countries are worth copying in other key policy areas? David, with your former diplomat hat on.
Almost any other European country on health policy, for one thing. I wish there was a country I could point to on net zero, to be honest, but we all seem to be captured by the same madness on that at the moment. But again, it's being chipped away at, so hopefully that's going to come. And Miele, I guess. I mean, who knows what he's going to make of it, but I love the
good dishwashers.
I love the. I know. I just long for somebody to kind of, tell it like it is, like he does, and if he succeeds, great.
Lionel, we've had several questions about your native land and the electoral battle. James says
there's no escape.
that we've got a choice between Sunak and Starmer. They've got a choice between Biden and Trump. I mean, the demented and the simply mad. So who would be the better US president for world trade and security, Biden or Trump?
Okay, we're going to have more long silence here. I am completely lost on which of those candidates is worse and will make the next 4 years more of a catastrophe. On the trade front, it's standard economic advice that tariffs are bad, and Trump is really big on them. That said, Biden just brought in 100% tariffs on EVs from China, so he's not a purist in trade either.
Nor is he a purist in net zero, because they're fracking like crazy, aren't they, the United States? And we are importing, are we not importing co-pilot liquid?
Yeah, a huge amount of... the US has become the biggest net exporter of liquefied natural gas since the war in Ukraine.
Yes, though Biden has put a pause on those exports in order to alienate as many of our European allies as possible.
But, so it's very riven, isn't it, the United States? I mean, have you ever known it so divided in terms of Democrats or not? My husband, actually, bless him, who's a very upright British gent, is going to the Republican Party conference. We're trying to get Anthony to wear a Make America Great Again peaked cap.
I mean, this period does hit harmonics with my youth, because I came of age during the 60s and early 70s, and there was a lot of division then, too. It had a different texture. The anti-Vietnam movement, at least, had a quality of people being personally invested in not wanting to be drafted and sent to Vietnam. I mean, it seemed to have a little more moral integrity than the posing on the left today. I am actually, though, in a part of the U.S. electorate that is weirdly united, and it's something like 67%, and that's the people who don't want to vote for either one of these geezers.
Wow.
But as a woman, I find the sight of these young people, obviously very idealistic young people, protesting in apparently sort of tacit support for Hamas, chanting things about these different, Houthis and Saudi. I just think these people are sponsored by Iran. I read a story yesterday that they rape female prisoners before they execute them because that will stop them going to heaven. I mean, do they not understand, Lionel, what is this vast evil that they're up against? What is wrong with them?
I mean, if we give them the benefit of the doubt, then they're just the ineducates that the brainwashing universities I referred to earlier inevitably produce. They clearly know nothing about the Middle East or about history in that region. If we're going to go a little farther and give them credit for thinking or doing any reading at all, then you're dealing with moral bankruptcy. And therefore, sheer conformity, more groupthink. Oh, my roommate is going out protesting, my whole floor of my dormitory is going to the pro-Palestine march, so I'm going to go too. And that's pretty much what it comes down to.
I'm afraid we're pretty much out of time. So one last question for David. We haven't mentioned the R word that much. I'm not talking about recession. I'm talking about reform. Because, of course, this is a huge political phenomenon, outpolling the Lib Dems now easily, even with Ed Davey falling off his paddleboard. Maybe they'll have a recovery. It's quite hard stand-up paddleboard, I have to say. I mean, it's quite hard. How are they going to do?
Nobody knows, to be honest. My sense is the reform vote might be quite soft. It depends a lot on what Nigel Farage himself does and how the tactics of the election play out. I mean, obviously, a lot of people who vote for reform, a lot of reform candidates, a lot of reform policy is kind of recognisably conservative policy, and many conservatives like it. But I have always said that still the Conservative Party is the party of the right. It's the party that has the organisation, the ability to get things done, and therefore focusing on the Conservative Party and trying to make it a better, more conservative party is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's it from Planet Normal for another week as we leave our sanctuary of sweet reason, our flying refuge of reason views.
I know. If you enjoy Planet Normal, and why the hell wouldn't you enjoy Planet Normal, please do leave us a rating and a review on wherever it is. We often, in the bleaker days, the co-pilot and I amuse ourselves by reading mainly lovely remarks, the odd 1 star from disagreeable people.
And as we speed away from our beloved Planet Normal, the madness of Planet Earth comes back into view thanks to our 2 fabulous guests, Lord David Frost and Lionel Shriver.
Hey. Woo!
Thank you to our producers, Isabel Bajard, Elliot Lampitt, Cass Ho, Louisa Wells. Thanks also to the Telegraph team that helped us stage this event, led by Debbie Stevens and Giles Gear. And thanks to all of you in the audience for coming. And those listening at home, stay safe and in touch with us and with each other. Until next week, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.